Good evening, everyone. This is now being recorded and is also on Facebook Live. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's Parsha Shiur, which of course is Vayeshev. And Vayeshev has the most ironic title, and we will get to it straight away. The title Vayeshev Yaakov. Yaakov settled down. And we see that the entire parsha is not Yaakov settling down at all. In fact, just the opposite, really just the opposite. So I want to show what we have in store for this evening. And as follows. So the Joseph story. Part one. It is part one. There are 4 parts to this, and it's Rabbi Sachs's Lessons for Life. As everyone knows, I'm sure, this past weekend marked the Shloshim for Rabbi Sachs, and we see how much is impacted on so many lives. And I have to say that what comes out from this evening, you'll see that he drew tremendous lessons for life from this week's parasha. And just by way of introduction, I traced out several different areas. The roles we play, the man, Reuben, never despair, Jacob, never despair, Joseph, Tamar and Judah, Ruth and Boaz. What are Ruth and Boaz doing in Vayeshev? They're not even mentioned. So all will become clear in a moment. But first of all, let's have a summary. What's in Vayeshev? So Jacob settles down in the land. He's been through the trauma with Lavan. He's been through the trauma with Esau. He's had the whole incident, which we discussed in detail last week with Dinah, his daughter. He's lost his beloved Rachel. It's enough. Time to settle down. And so he settles down. But no sooner has he settled down than the Joseph story begins. Joseph, we understand, is his favorite son. He gave him the multicolored coat. However, we understand this. It's certainly something that he gave Joseph, which he didn't give to the others. The brothers were jealous. Joseph told bad reports about his brothers. We know Joseph had 2 dreams regarding, well, his brothers. They understood it was regarding the brothers, that their sheaves bow down to his sheaf. And then the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to him. They were jealous. They hated him. And they plotted. They went away, far away from home. They lived in Hebron, which is south of Jerusalem. They went to Shechem, which is well north of Jerusalem, to look after their sheep. And Jacob incomprehensively sent Joseph on a mission to find out how the brothers are getting on. And Joseph went in search, and he found them, not in Shechem, but a place called Dotan. How did he get to Dotan? Well, we'll see that a bit later. The brothers see him coming, and they want to kill him. They plan to kill him. Reuben saves his life. He says, no, can't kill him. Put him in a pit. And Reuben has in mind, when they're not looking, he's going to come back to the pit, rescue Joseph, and take him home. It's a great plan, but as we know, it doesn't work. It's not clear from the text who pulls him out, but it really doesn't matter. The end result is the same. Joseph is sold to the Midianites, who then pass him on, and eventually he arrives. He's passed on to the Ishmaelites, he's passed on to the Midianites, and he arrives as a slave in Potiphar's house, where he prospers for a while, but Potiphar's wife has eyes on him and wants to seduce him. He refuses. Eventually, she frames him. He's thrown into prison. Again, in prison, he's regarded very highly by the head of the prison guards. And there he meets the butler and the baker. He interprets their dreams and maybe thinks now he's going free from prison, and it doesn't happen. The butler forgets him. That's the end of the Sedra. That's the end of Vayeshev. Of course, there's a meanwhile, which we didn't mention. Bang in the middle, a whole long section. What happens to Judah? Well, actually, at the pit, Judah says to the brothers, what does it profit us that we should kill him or he should die? Let's sell him as a slave. And that's how he ends up being sold as a slave. Judah's suggestion. The very next section, which is Rabbi, says, Vayered Yudah meitechav. Judah went down from his brothers, down in every sense. They said, it was your idea to sell him. Look what it's done to our father. Go away. And he went away. He married a Canaanite woman, which he should never have done. They had 3 sons. And then the first son was married to a lady called Tamar. He died. The second son was told, you must now marry Tamar, and the first child you have will be like your deceased brother. He said, I'm not doing that. He refused to consummate the marriage, and he died. Yehuda didn't know any of this, and all he knew was, I'm not taking a chance on the third son. He made some excuse. Meanwhile, he himself was widowed. And you had Tamar, his daughter-in-law, played a trick on him, dressed herself up and as a prostitute, a place where she knew that he was hanging out. He was lonely. Make a long story short, she became pregnant from him, but he didn't know it was her because she was in disguise. And we'll see what happened later on. Vayeshev Yaakov, Jacob settled down? Not at all. Not at all. But let's see what does happen at crucial turning points and crucial decisions that people made or they didn't make. This whole series is called Crucial Decisions in the book of Bereshit. And we'll see how that plays out this evening. So let's take a look back to our PowerPoint. So we were at the roles that we play and the man. What about the man? So let's have a look. So this is what we're told. A man found Joseph wandering around in the hills, and he asked him, "What are you looking for?" And he replied, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They've moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. The obvious question, who is the man? This is what I wanted. Who's the man? Well, Rashi says he was the angel Gabriel. Ibn Ezra says he was a passerby. The Ramban says God sent him a guide without his knowledge. But let's go to the core issue. Who is the man? And we need to ask another question. Why does the Torah take 3 verses to tell us about this conversation that Joseph had with a man? We don't know who he is. What are we to learn from it? And this has to be the question. Every time we see something in the Torah that is not clear to us why it's even there, we need to know, what is it that we learn from it? And here we have something remarkable that Rabbi Sachs has seized upon, and it's this. He says, I believe that there are times when we feel lost, and then someone says or does something that lifts us or points the way to a new direction and destination. And years later, looking back, we see how important that intervention was, even though it seems light at the time. And that is when we know that we too encountered an angel who didn't know necessarily that he or she was an angel. That is what the story of Joseph Stranger is about. It occurs to me to say, and without getting too obvious, I suppose, that we had a recent case of someone very sadly ill and passed away. And before he became suddenly very ill, he struck up a friendship with a lady who ended up looking after him. And the family called her an angel, because that's what she was. You know, an angel in Hebrew is malach. Malach can also be a messenger. So sometimes we are God's messengers and we don't even know it. And that's really what the Ramban was saying. And Rabbi Sachs, in his piece that he wrote some years ago on Vayeshev, wrote about a lady called Dorothy Pinto and a man called Elliot Jacobson. Who were they? Dorothy Pinto, in 1912, at the age of 17, married Jacob de Rothschild here in England. 17. So in 1914, when World War I broke out, she was 19. And between 1914 and 1917, she was put in a position she had no expectation of helping Chaim Weizmann make all the right connections in the British government, so that by 1917, they were issuing the Balfour Declaration to Lord Rothschild. She was put in that unique place. Chaim Weizmann, brilliant man, chemist, but a foreigner and working in Manchester, not London. She made that connection. You could say she was Chaim Weizmann's angel at the time. Well, Chaim Weizmann needed another angel. In 1948, the United States was ambivalent. Are they going to recognize Israel, the new state of Israel, or are they not? And a man called Eddie Jacobson came to the fore, very different. The Rothschild were obviously the aristocrats, among the aristocrats of England. Eddie Jacobson was a tradesman living in America from Kansas City. But in his military training, also in 1917, as it happens, he was put together with a certain man called Harry Truman, who was also from Kansas City. And they became friends. They even set up business together after the First World War. The business failed because of the Great Depression, but they remained friends. And in 1948, when Harry Truman refused to meet Chaim Weizmann, Eddie Jacobson went to the White House and said, Harry, you got to meet a friend of mine. And for the second time in 31 years, Chaim Weizmann was introduced to the right people at the right time. Thus, you have angels enabling, if you like, the state of Israel. But all of us in our lives will encounter angels. Of that, I'm sure. We just have to have our eyes open. However, Reuben was so well-intentioned. He's going to save Joseph. And he did save his life. The Torah says he saved his life, which he did. Brothers would have killed him. Had him put in the pit, he's going back there to rescue him later. On this, the Midrash Tanchuma says as follows: if Reuben had known that God would write about him, and Reuben heard and saved him from them, he would have lifted Joseph onto his shoulders there and then, and taken him back to his father. Reuben didn't do, and it was hard, he didn't have the confidence to do what was really necessary. He did half of what was necessary, but it wasn't enough to spare his father from the grief, 22 years that Joseph was missing. Again, Rabbi Sachs, we are not inconsequential. We can make a difference to our world. And when we do so, we become God's partners in the work of redemption, bringing the world that is a little closer to the world that ought to be. Powerful words, very powerful words. So, it didn't happen with Reuben. We understand we have angels in our lives, and sometimes we can be that angel. Reuben could have been that angel. But now let's go to the second major thing to learn from in this week's portion. So Joseph didn't come home. The brothers, when they saw Joseph was gone, or if they sold him, it's not clear whether how it worked out. Either way, what are we going to tell father? You know what? Let's play a trick. They shechted an animal, a goat. They had already taken Joseph's coat from him. They dipped it in the blood of a goat. They showed it to their father, and they said, "Hakerna, look at this. To whom does this coat belong?" Jacob said, "It's Joseph's. A wild animal has torn him apart. Tarof Toraf Yosef. Joseph is torn apart." Now we come into this verse on the screen. Jacob rent his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned his son for a long time. His sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Look at the Hebrew words. Vayima'ein litnachem. That is active. He refused. No, I'm not allowing anyone to comfort me. What does that mean? You could say he was beside himself with grief, but that's not what the verse says. He refused to be comforted. Why did he refuse? Didn't he see the evidence that the sons showed him? And they said, Hakerna, recognize. You know, Jacob deceived his father. Velohi kiro, his father did not recognize. Torah uses the same word. Father didn't recognize him. Time of the blessings. Laban deceived Jacob over the marriage of Rachel and Leah. So there's possibly a part of him that didn't believe, notwithstanding the evidence that he saw in front of him. He refused to be comforted. Where else do we find it? As far as I know, there's only one other place. And here it is. We read this on Rosh Hashanah, Haftarah, second day Rosh Hashanah, one of the most moving passages in the entire Tanakh, in the entire Bible. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel is weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted. Look at the Hebrew. Me'ana lehinachem. It's the same words. She's refusing to be comforted because the children are no more. That's an extraordinary passage. And Rachel is not just anyone, Jacob's wife. Now, what does it mean she refuses to be comforted? Where is Rachel? She died many centuries ago. She's in heaven. Just because the person's not in this world doesn't mean we don't live on. We live on. We live on in the next world. And in the next world, Rachel refuses to be comforted. Extraordinary. What does it mean she refuses to be comforted? So let's see what happens next. And I haven't put the whole passage. It's this beautiful passage, Jeremiah chapter 31. There is hope for your future, declares the Lord. Yesh tikva. Tikva means hope, as in Hatikva, the hope, the national anthem of Israel. Yesh tikva l'acharitech ne'um Hashem. There's hope for your future, says the Lord. Your children will return to their own land. V'shavu vanim ligvulam. They will return to their borders. So what is this? She refused to be comforted. What is it? Vayima'en lehidnachem. Refusing to be comforted. Do you know what it means? They refused to be reconciled. Jacob's thinking, I don't know for certain that he's gone. There's no body at all. There's no funeral. Rachel, she knows they've gone from the land. They haven't gone completely. She refused to be reconciled to the idea there's not going to be a future. I just want to tell a very quick story, which some of you have heard before, but it is so incredibly moving. 1929 was the Hebron massacre, as we know. Terrible, terrible massacre on a Shabbos afternoon, Shabbos, August the 24th, 1929. My mother's birthday, that's how it's etched in my memory. And on that day, as we said, the Arabs of Hebron and some from Yerushalayim massacred the Jews who'd been there, some of who'd been there for hundreds of years, their families. And some days afterwards, the British came in, it was under British control at that time, and they decided to expel the Jewish community from Hebron. The shul there was built in the wake of the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in the late 1400s. But no, they had to expel them. And what then happened was one young man, who Jews had been rounded up, one young man ran away, and they ran after him. They ran after him, and the soldier caught him up. Where did he run to? He'd run to the shul. And he'd opened the ark. He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm taking out the Torah scroll. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it with me. And when we come back here, I'll bring the scroll back." And the soldier laughed at him. He said, "You Jews will never, ever come back to Hebron." In 1986, the Jewish community of Hebron was reestablished. Huge celebrations. And amongst the crowd, suddenly there was an old man holding a Sefer Torah, trying to break his way through. That old man was the young man in 1929 who took the Sefer Torah for safekeeping. And he explained to the crowd who he was and what this was. And I have been to that shul, and I have touch the mantle of that Sefer Torah, which is the original mantle. And he came, he said, I kept my promise. Why? Because he refused to be comforted for the loss of Hebron in 1929. And instead of saying refused to be comforted, maybe we can say he wasn't reconciled. He wasn't reconciled, and therefore he kept up hope. So these are the words that before we get to the words, just one last thing. Everyone knows Psalm 137 is made into a great pop song. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and there we cried as we remembered Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord in a strange land? And then the next part is what we sing at weddings. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I don't remember you. If I do not consider Jerusalem above my chiefest joy. These remarkable, powerful words meant that we never reconciled ourselves to the loss of Jerusalem. And today, we have merited to see the fulfillment of the verse that we sing every time we take the Sefer Torah out. Ki mitzion tetzei tzorah davar Hashem Yerushalayim. For out of Zion will come forth the Torah. That's been fulfilled in our day. Today, the Torah capital of the world is once again Jerusalem. So these are the words of Rabbi Sachs. Jews are the people who refuse to be comforted, and I put in brackets, reconciled, because they never gave up hope. Jacob did eventually see Joseph again. Rachel's children did return to the land. Jerusalem is once again the Jewish home. Why? Because Jews had a faith, a trust, an unbreakable hope that proved stronger than historical inevitability. Jewish survival was sustained in that hope, and that hope came from Jacob. He refused to be comforted. And so, while we live in a world still scarred by violence and poverty and injustice, must we, what Rabbi Sachs is saying, he's calling to us, and he's still calling to us, don't accept something which isn't right in the world. Don't accept certain losses we have to accept. A person, a loved one dies, we have to become reconciled to that. But there are many things that happen in the world which we don't have to accept because there's always the possibility of change, of return. And that really takes us, let's have a quick summary first. So there are times when we feel lost. Then someone says or does something that lifts us or points the way to a new direction and destination, an angel. We can be that angel for someone else. And Jews are the people who refuse to be comforted because they never gave up hope. Joseph. Well, Joseph's a person that really needed to be in that position of not giving up hope. Look and see what happens with Joseph. He starts off, multicolored coat. He's stripped of his coat, thrown into the pit, sold as a slave. He gains favor with his master, placing him in charge of everything. Had faith in him. But he's falsely accused. You can see he's in jail. Who's he with? The butler and the baker. They have dreams. Baker has a bad dream. The butler has a good dream. He's going to be restored to service. Joseph interprets the dream and he says to the butler, when things go well for you, remember that I was with you. Remember me to Pharaoh. The butler did not remember Joseph. He forgot all about him. I just want to mention that from the time we have the picture at the top to the end of this, the butler did not remember Joseph, forgot all about him, is 13 years. For 13 years, Joseph's been away from his family. He's had his ups and his downs. Just as when he thinks it's going well, he crashes again. You know, he starts off the golden boy. He's in the pit, regarded with prestige in Potiphar's house. Then he's falsely accused, into jail. Then he has a ray of hope, interpreting the butler's dream. Now I'll go free. And then he doesn't. Then he doesn't. We end up Vayeshev. I sort of joke, if a person only comes to shul every year in Vayeshev, all he can think is poor Joseph. Doesn't know the end of the story. As Jews, we believe that God is with us. Sometimes we feel lost, but then we discover, as Joseph did, that he's been guiding our steps all along. Because right at the beginning of next week's portion, it's Pharaoh has the dream. By the time we finish the first portion of next week's Sefer Miketz, Joseph is standing before Pharaoh. And within a short space of time, meaning the same day, he is viceroy of Egypt, the most powerful country in the world. That's the turnaround that Joseph had, and he ended up bringing the family and looking after them in times of famine. Joseph, and I put here in small print because it's not the theme of this week's portion, but it does come up later on, was the first person in recorded history to forgive. When the brothers realized it was Joseph, he was still alive, and he's such a powerful man, they probably thought they're finished now. But he said, no, I see God's will in this. And every episode, this Rabbi Sachs talking again, every episode that seems to be leading to tragedy turns out in retrospect to be a necessary step to saving lives and the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams. You know, Joseph in Potiphar's house, Potiphar was an important man. He learned to be a manager. That's what he learned. He learned in jail, and it's an important lesson that he learned what it is to suffer. And he also learned the hard way to have a greater appreciation of other people, even for his brothers, for his father, for everyone. Joseph, at the end of his life, was not the Joseph we meet at the beginning of this week's parasha. A little vain, we're told he, brushed his hair a lot and he fancied himself, and so different. So by the time he's out of jail, and when he stands in front of Pharaoh, this could be his moment, but he says all the time, God is telling you this, God is telling you that. He's saying this to the pagan Pharaoh, the powerful man. What do you mean God? He could chop his head off. But he remains true to his values. He understands. Joseph understands that God is with him. And here we have Rabbi Sachs' life-changing idea. Despair is never justified. This is a stronger statement than we said before about Jacob, not giving up hope. Despair is never justified. You don't know what's around the corner. So let's summarize again. To refresh our memories, there are times when we feel lost, and if someone says or does something that lifts us or points the way to new direction and destination, an angel. But don't forget, we can be that angel for someone else. And the third thing, Jews are the people who refuse to be comforted because they never gave up hope. A lesson learned from Jacob. From Joseph, we learn the power of forgiveness and also that despair is never justified. Now let's go to Judah and Tamar. Let's summarize the story again for the moment and see the incredible lessons that we learn. First of all, just to read the text in a cold sort of way, you say, gosh, Judah did that? And from Judah comes King David and Messiah? Judah married a Canaanite? then his sons behaved in such a way, then he was with Tamar, as they say in Ivrit, Ma, what did he do? And not only that, he heard that Tamar was expecting. And he said, she's supposed to marry my third son, knowing full well that Judah had refused to give the third son to Tamar in marriage. And what did Judah say? Let her be taken out and burnt. She has committed adultery. Well, Tamar was a bit smarter than that. When Judah came to her, he said, what do I owe you? She said, 2 goats. But I want a deposit. Your signet ring, your cord, and your staff. Leave with me. And he left them there. And when he sent a messenger with the payment and to take back the deposit, she was gone and nobody had ever heard of her. And then they found out she was pregnant. And he said, this is like a court case, burnt at the stake or something like that. What did she say? This is what she said. And here I brought the Hebrew because of such powerful words. Vaytomer, and she said, Hakerna, recognize, Lemi hachotem hapetilim hamate ha'ele. To whom this, the signature ring, the cord, the staff, to whom they belong. She didn't say, you're the father. She said, recognize. Vayaker Yehuda, Yehuda recognized. Vayomer, and he said, Sadka mimeni, she's more righteous than I. I have to tell you, these 2 verses, I haven't measured if they're right in the middle of this week's parasha, but they are an incredible turning point. Because she threw at Yehuda, Hakerna, what he'd thrown at his father, Hakerna, recognized about the coat. Recognized about the coat that Jacob should learn a falsehood. Here she's saying, recognize and learn the truth. And in his mind, he must have said to himself, I have fallen very far. But he turned himself around. Vayaker Yehuda, and Yehuda recognized Vayomer, and he said, she is more righteous than I. What do we take away from this? Again, quoting Rabbi Sachs, although you'll see most of it's a quote from the Talmud. Tamar taught Yehuda, never put anyone to shame. She didn't say, you're the father. He could have said, I don't recognize, and that would be the end of it. In the words of the Talmud, a person should be willing to throw himself into a furnace of fire rather than shame another person in public. Incredible message. But here's another incredible message. Judah is the first person in the Torah explicitly to admit that he was wrong. Here in Vayeshev with Tamar, and later on with Joseph. Later on with Joseph, he's the one that makes the confession. So if we asked, how can Judah do such a thing? Yes, how could he do such a thing? But Judah the penitent becomes the ancestor of Israel's kings because he's done teshuvah. He's repented for what he did. While Joseph the righteous is only a viceroy, Mishneh Melech, second to the king. Joseph didn't sin like Judah did, but Judah came back. And to admit that he's wrong, that's hard. But he did. And that too has changed our history. All these things have changed our history. Here's a quote from the book of Ruth. May the Lord make the woman, when Ruth marries Boaz, may the Lord make the woman who's coming into your home like Rachel and Leah who built up the house of Israel. Okay, I understand that so far. What about this? May your family be like that of Perez, Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Yehuda. Tamar actually went on to have twins. It's so profound because the principle of what we call a Levirate marriage in the Torah is that the first child that's born replaces the one who has died. Well, here two had died and she gave birth to twins. It's incredibly moving. Again, Rabbi Sachs, Tamar and Ruth give birth to children to maintain the name of the dead, so his name will not disappear, as Boaz says of Ruth. And it is they who are sensitive to the living. Tamar by not shaming Yehuda, and Ruth by not letting Naomi return home alone. Rabbi Sachs, I find it exceptionally moving that the Bible should cast in these heroic roles two figures at the extreme margins of Israelite society. Who is Tamar? Who is Ruth? Women, childless widows, outsiders. Tamar and Ruth, powerless except for their moral courage. They wrote their names into Jewish history as role models who gave birth to royalty, to remind us that true royalty lies in love and faithfulness. And the greatness often exists where we expect it the least. There's an incredible midrash, which I wanted to put in front of you. This is a sedra of so many calamities, but something else is happening. Rav Shmuel ben Nachman in Bereshit Rabbah says as follows: the brothers were busy in the selling of Joseph. Joseph was busy with his sackcloth and fasting, so to speak. He's upset. He's been it's obvious. Reuben was busy with his sackcloth and fasting because he blew it. Jacob was busy with his sackcloth and fasting over the presumed death of Joseph. Judah was busy taking a wife for himself. And God was busy creating the light of the Mashiach, who will eventually issue from the union of Judah and Tamar. So while all these calamities are going on, we're already seeing the path to our ultimate redemption. And Joseph doesn't know it. And we, reading Vayeshev, also don't know it. That Joseph is going through incredible suffering. Not only is it going to end well, but actually it's preparing him for when it does end well. So it's not just that God is creating the light of Mashiach. God is preparing the way, which is just not comprehensible at the time. So here we have, in conclusion, it's 5 messages. There are times when we feel lost, having a really bad day, really bad time. And then someone says or does something that lifts us. It could even be a smile or a friendly word of advice. Points the way to a new direction and destination, an angel. And we can be that angel for someone else. Jews are the people who refuse to be comforted because they never gave up hope, a lesson learned from Jacob. From Joseph, we learn the power of forgiveness and that despair is never justified. And finally, true royalty lies in love and faithfulness to the living and to the dead, exemplified by Ruth, who showed her dead husband the kavod of staying with Naomi, but staying with Naomi. And Tamar had a deep understanding, much deeper than Yehuda does. Tamar from the outside, what would she know? She knew that the importance of preserving the names right up there. And she stuck with it. Her faithfulness bore out. This parasha of Vayeshev is an extraordinary journey, but it's a journey which actually is only just starting, because we've got another 3 portions to come where we get deeper into the story of Joseph and his brothers. And there's so much more that is going to be said. You know, there's a strong connection between what happens here and the story of Hanukkah, because Vayeshev really is a theme of dark times. Dark for Jacob, dark for Joseph, dark for Judah. Huge embarrassments. But if we look through the parasha as we've done this evening, we can see flickers of light. The Jews at the time of Hanukkah and the Greeks, very dark. But there were flickers of light. And then, as we know, the miracle with the oil, there was a tiny flicker of light. So I'd like to wish everyone what they call a lichtig Hanukkah. We should have a Hanukkah that is full of light, may bring light to all of our lives. The world's in a dark period at the moment. We saw the first flicker of light today, the first vaccinations. We know there's still a journey to go. But really, the lesson that we learn from Joseph, never despair. That's the message for now. We've all come so far. Let's keep our precautions, keep safe, don't despair, refuse to accept things how they are, and just remember, true royalty is not only love, it's also faithfulness, faithful to God, faithful to each other. I wish everyone a wonderful Hanukkah and a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very enjoyable. I enjoyed that.
Chanukah Sameach. Thanks very much.
Hard to